What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Path to Freedom podcast. Today, I'm joined by Tom DuFore, who's the founder and CEO of Big Sky Franchise Team. Tom, what's up, man? How you doing?
Hey, doing great. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here, Wes. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. I've been looking forward to this. I'm glad that we were able to make it happen. I've gotten the chance to get to know you a little bit over the last few months, and kind of crazy that we didn't cross paths sooner than we did, as long as we've both been in the franchising space and we have a lot of mutual connections and friends in franchising. But what you and your firm do, I think you're going to bring a unique angle and insight compared to a lot of the guests that I have on this show, that'll be really valuable for the audience. So why don't you start us off and just kind of give us the quick down and dirty overview? What do you guys do at Big Sky Franchise Team, and who do you help?
Sure. Great question. Well, a lot of your audience is probably familiar and working with you, and maybe they've expressed an interest in maybe starting a franchise or launching into their own business. And our role in the franchise world really comes on the very, very front end, and working with an entrepreneur that has a successful business of some kind and says, I want to franchise this.
Yeah.
And so our role in is, as you know, franchising is it's a complicated business. And what we do is we help our clients franchise their business with confidence. And we have a 3-step process that we take them through to help them go through that. And so that's in short summary what we do, and helping clients figure out the strategy, things like what are their franchise fees and royalties and territory structure? How does all of that work together? And making sure they get connected with a great franchise attorney, and building out franchise manuals and marketing plans and brochures, and just being a guide and providing support and coaching and consulting to them along the way, so that as they enter into franchising, that they can support the best that they are able to their new franchisees that come into the system. So when, for example, someone like you or others in the franchise space might be introducing newer or emerging brands, that they're putting their best foot forward.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, before a company can even say, okay, we are officially a franchise now and we're ready to start talking to people about the possibility of becoming a franchise owner. I think a lot of people probably just don't fully appreciate how much goes into it. I would imagine you have a lot of conversations with business owners and founders that are considering franchising it. You help them kind of fully understand everything that goes into it, as well as the cost and the amount of time. And they're like, yeah, never mind. I'm not, I don't think I'm ready to do this yet.
Yes, that's exactly right. We speak with owners, entrepreneurs all over the country, all over the world, that are thinking about franchising, and it's understandable. Any business owner that's reached a certain stage of success, they reach a point where they say, okay, well, what do I do with this now? Do
Yeah.
I open additional company-owned locations? Do I sell the business? Do I franchise it? Do I sell it to my manager and start a new company? What am I going to do with this? And
Yeah.
so at that point is most often when these entrepreneurs reach out to us, and we start having a conversation about what it looks like to franchise and to franchise a business. And over the years of doing this, I've been doing this for just over 21 years now, and I've spoken with tens of thousands of successful entrepreneurs, and the vast majority of them never end up franchising. And there's a wide variety of reasons why, but part of the reason we exist is to help answer a lot of questions or concerns that they have about franchising, and so that they can either rule it out or rule it in to
Mhm.
their expansion strategy. Most of them end up ruling it out for, again, a wide variety of reasons. But a lot, I think, realize that it does take more time, effort, and energy than they might be willing to put into it or are interested in learning about.
We'll get right back to the episode in just a minute, but if you've been considering business ownership, if you're already a business owner looking to expand and you're curious about franchising, I'd love to connect with you, answer any initial questions that you have, talk about a specific franchise, and detail the exact process that I use and have taken hundreds of people through to help them understand franchise ownership, find the right franchise for them, and conduct the necessary due diligence. Click the link in the show notes if you'd like to schedule a free, no obligation strategy call. I look forward to talking with you. And now back to the episode. Yeah, what I was going to say, what are, and maybe you just answered the question, but what are like some of the more common reasons that someone would say, you know what, I don't think this is the right direction for us to go?
Yeah, great question. So, a business, uh, maybe one, maybe I'll answer this in looking at it from what would make someone quote franchisable. What would make a
Yeah,
business
yeah,
franchisable from just some kind of big checklist items, and so that helps rule out for some people, and then we can talk through
definitely.
some other reasons why
Yeah,
someone,
let's do that. That's
yeah,
great.
might not. And we have three big check boxes that we look at when we start having conversations with people about franchising their business. The first is there, does the owner have a profitable prototype?
That's
And
important.
while it seems like a given, it's not always a given.
No, I believe me, I've seen some dogs, man, where you're like, if this is the prototype, I don't know that I want in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, is there a profitable prototype? And every owner will eventually say, "Well, Tom, my P&L says this, and my tax return says that." And ultimately, what we're really looking for is, can someone own the business, and can they make a living doing it? Now, that living can be we can dig in great detail on that,
Yeah,
but
sure, there's a
generally
range.
speaking, that's what we're looking at. A
Yeah,
living plus a return on their investment is really what we're looking for there, to be able to show to have confidence that a franchisee would be able to receive. The
yeah,
second part is the owner, can they train a franchisee how to run and operate their business, and in some cases not just train them, but are they willing to train and support a franchisee in coming through this? And as you know, training and supporting a franchisee is the really the number one job of the franchisor. Once that franchisee comes on board, they've got to train them, they've got to support them, they've got to help guide them through this process. So is that owner willing and able to do that? And then the third piece we like to look at is, are there enough customers
mm,
at minimum regionally? Preferably, we'd like to see a national customer base, and
yeah,
ideally internationally. You never know where that franchisor might expand into.
sure.
And really, what we're saying is, if someone were to open up a business similar to the one they're looking at franchising in most markets across the country, that there would be customers there that they could
There'd be a
sell
demand
products.
for it.
Right,
Yeah, is there
exactly.
something that's, like, super local or super specific? Like, I don't know, we live at the coast, right? So, like, we have businesses down here at the coast that are very relevant because we have a lot of docks and boats and things like that, but there's, probably the vast majority of the country, those businesses probably wouldn't be viable.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So these, and I think this is important for people to understand, right? Because I mean, a lot of the types of franchises that I work with, at first glance, to someone that's just not spent much time looking at franchising, they can be like, "Well, what's franchisable about that?" Like, I'll never forget. I was doing a consultation with a guy. This was a few years ago, and my wife and I had recently become franchisees with an insulation franchise. So, you know, pink fluffy stuff in the attic insulation. And I'm using that as an example to illustrate, some of the benefits that these different franchises can provide, right? Because, if you're looking at McDonald's, right? A lot of the benefit you get as a franchisee is the global brand recognition, right? Well, in something like insulation, the brand recognition is not nearly as valuable as some of the other ways that you're going to get value as the franchisee. But and this guy was, like a high net worth guy. He had a big ego, and he was not one for wanting to like follow someone else's process. So we didn't work together very long, but I'll just never forget. And he cut me off and he said, "What the hell's franchisable about insulation?" And I kind of just, sat there for a minute. I said, well, what the hell is franchisable about fried chicken? And he didn't really have like a response. So, it's not that you have to have like this proprietary product or this, innovative, completely new way of bringing a service to the market necessarily. You see that sometimes, but a lot of times it's just, it's the things you said, right? Does this company have it figured out? Do they know how to run this business profitably, right? And do they have the systems and processes in place so that they're going to be able to bring someone else in, teach them how to do it, decrease the learning curve, and support them so that they can, replicate what they've been able to do. But I think that's kind of lost on some people, that they think, in order for the business to be franchisable, there's got to be something proprietary or really unique about it.
That's a great point, Wes. I would say that's a very common misunderstanding or
Yeah.
misconception about franchising. And if you look around in the franchise world, and you're familiar with this, most franchises, when you look at them, they're generally fairly average businesses. It's
Yep.
just someone figured out a process and a system that works and can be replicated. That if someone else is willing to go and execute on those processes and systems, it produces revenue, which therefore can produce an income and a return on their investment, and so on down the line. And ultimately, that's what you're looking for in a franchise. And some are, is we work in with mostly emerging brands
Uh-huh.
as we go through this, but whether they're mature or anything in between, the common theme is a replicatable system that can be replicated. And then, of course, it's always being refined over time. The system is never final. It's just being one version of where it is today, and it's constantly improving.
Yeah, that's how it should be, right? Is no company, period, franchise or not, should ever get to a point where they're like, hey, we don't have any room to get better. And it's usually the franchisees that are, the biggest contributors of, bringing new ideas and innovation to the table. There's a lot of cool stories out there. I think it was, you know, Subway, the idea for the $5 foot long, and that special that they ran for so many years, that came from a franchisee. The freaky fast delivery, in such a tight radius from Jimmy John's, that was a franchisee that started doing it, got some traction with it, and now those are like kind of cornerstones that those brands are known for. But yeah, so it's fun to see that sort of thing. So you guys are mostly working with emerging brands, outside of those three kind of criteria that you looked at to say, all right, you check all three of these boxes. So you do kind of have the most critical things that are needed to be franchisable. Are there other criteria that you're then looking at, or do you guys have kind of a certain industry focus or business type focus that you try to stick to?
Yeah, great question. When we're looking and working with clients, we are, I guess, industry agnostic is the term that
Okay.
most
Yeah.
people will describe. So whether it's services, food, hospitality, unique things like maybe manufacturers or wholesalers that are
Mhm.
looking to franchise, a wide variety of businesses. And one thing that I've noticed in our clients over the last, call it 8 or 9 years, that they've shared with me is that one of the things that makes us unique is that we can see the ability of franchising as a solution for unique businesses. So, industries or businesses that might not think, well, franchising won't work for me because I'm not a hotel or I'm not a restaurant.
Mhm.
Uh, I think that's, in my opinion, that's the wrong way of thinking. Franchising is just a method of distribution. So,
Yes.
it's
Yep.
just a way to get more units or more pins on a map or locations out and be serving more customers with whatever kind of product or service you're offering. Now, does that mean franchising is the best distribution method for your business? Of course not. But
Yeah.
I always say, if you're thinking of expanding, you have to consider franchising. You might not do it,
Right.
but it's something worth considering as an option to explore.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's such a good point. Out of curiosity, what are some of the most off the wall businesses that you've talked to about franchising, whether they did move forward with franchising or not? It's one of my favorite things to do on a platform like this is just bring people awareness of some of the types of businesses that are out there that are franchises that you just never would imagine exist as a franchise.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting ones is they it's a business that reclaims used grease or oils from restaurants. Then they
Yeah.
take
Okay. Yeah.
then they take the grease to a refinery. They clean it, process it, and turn it into a usable product that can then be resold to other manufacturers. So it's not just taking and cleaning grease traps. There are franchises that clean grease
Yeah.
traps and
Sure.
hoods and things like that, but they actually
Yep.
reclaim the used oil and then go back, process it at a big manufacturing facility that they create, process it, clean it, and I don't know how they do it. But they've got a whole
Sure.
process to refine
Somehow or
this
another.
to turn it into another usable product that they
Yeah.
can then take and turn and resell. So it's a really just as an example of something that like, wow, I that would have never thought. And
Yeah.
it's these things that are right under your nose, probably picking grease up from your favorite chicken fast food, the fast
Yeah.
food chicken
Yeah.
place, right?
So many
Uh,
restaurants,
yep.
anywhere with a fryer, I imagine. And I'll go out on a limb and say, if a business like that is operated appropriately, it probably makes a freaking killing, right? I mean, a lot of times it's the dirtiest, unsexiest businesses that can be the most lucrative. And they always say riches are in the niches, right? And that's pretty niche, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, I mean, there's so many just options out there, and I think it blows a lot of people's minds once they start to dig a little bit deeper into this whole world of franchising, that okay, it's not just fast food restaurants and hotels and gas stations and things like that. I mean, I recently started working with a franchise where they clean and detail private jets. um, I work with one that's like a biohazard and crime scene cleanup franchise. There's a brand that I mean, are really niche and they make a killing. They do custom window boxes, right? So they'll come to your house and build you a custom window box, and then they'll come back once a quarter and plant new seasonal, plants or flowers for you. Um, just crazy stuff. But it's fun. It's fun to look at some of those kind of off the wall, out of the box type concepts.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And my wife she says this to our kids often as just a reminder: don't yuck someone else's yum, kind of an idea, just as a cute way for the kids to remember. But it truly is what might not be attractive to you as
Yes.
a franchise buyer, as for one franchise buyer. And this is what you do, Wes, right? I mean, you help
Yep.
kind of match make and help someone find the right fit for whatever they're looking for. And if someone's not interested in brand, it's no different than buying a house. Someone you look at when you buy a new home, you go look at 10, 20 houses, maybe more if you're scrolling online. Well, that
Sure.
same
Yeah.
house that you just threw in the not interested pile, someone else next week goes and buys that house, right?
And
So
someone owned it before,
that's right. That's
so
right.
yeah, there's definitely not a one size fits all approach to it. And the other thing that's interesting, that I've learned over the years is that a lot of times if someone comes to me thinking they want a certain type of business, as long as they're willing to keep an open enough mind to say, okay, well, let's go look at some good options that are in that kind of category that you're interested in, but would you be willing to entertain some other options as well? A lot of times what they realize is that the business they thought they wanted is not actually the business that they wanted, and something else that had never even crossed their mind as being an option for them. It really checks all of the boxes. And usually it comes down more to like, if you can really get clear on your goals and, what you want to get out of the business from a financial standpoint, but also like a lifestyle standpoint, and, how you want to be spending your time as the business owner. That's where I think a lot of times people are surprised to realize that, oh, I always thought it would be cool to own this type of a business, but that actually probably isn't the best vehicle to get me where I'm trying to go. And there's other businesses that would do a better job of that. But yeah, it's never a dull moment. I imagine you get to have a lot of just really interesting conversations with founders of different types of businesses, and help them explore whether or not franchising is the right move for them or not. So I'm curious, like, what does the typical timeline look like for you? So let's say you start having conversations with a prospective client. You go through this process that you've already kind of described to us, confirm that, yeah, you kind of have everything that we typically look for to say this business makes sense to franchise, and the founder understands everything that's involved. They decide that's the direction they want to go. How long are you working with that? I'm sure it varies depending on where they're at when they get to you, but typically speaking, how long are you working with that company before they're ready to really hit go on franchising and start trying to sell franchises?
Yeah, so a typical timeline for a business that we would work with to help take them through the franchising process, I would say a broad range might be 3 months to 12 months to kind of be the
Mhm.
shortest to
Okay.
the longest. And
Yep.
most are around a 6 month window, give or take a little bit, where start to finish, get all their documents sorted out, get the strategy put together, help educate and get them trained so that they have an idea of what they're venturing into as they start to look to launch the franchise effort.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And then at that point, are you continuing to work with them as they go off and begin franchising? Is it kind of an ongoing relationship at that point?
It is, yeah. Our number
Yeah.
one value at our company is win-win relationships. And
Mhm.
it's critical. We always want to find the win for the client first. And I think it's important to have that if you're in franchising anyway, it's got to be a win-win when
Yeah.
you're looking at this. But we want to find the win for our client, and the win back for us is it's always easy to find the win for yourself. Human nature is rather self-serving, and so it's easy to find that one.
Yeah.
And then we approach it in a relational way. So I've found that
Mhm.
as we've clarified our own values, it has attracted the right other clients that generally work with us have a similar value system. They want to have more of a relationship and working together. And is it a transaction or contract signed and promises fulfilled? Of course. But at the end of the day, it's a relationship, and it's much like this week and last week. I had a client from 5 years ago, a client from 9 years ago that reached out and said, "Hey, Tom, I need help with whatever it was." They had a variety of issues, and that's just part of that long-standing relationship. They know that they can call someone that they can trust to give them advice or suggestions that's in their best interest or helping them in making a decision for where they're looking to go. So, yeah, we include just general consulting as part of our package as a flat fee, so they have access.
Okay. Yeah.
We've got 14 people on our team, so this way, then the clients know that they can call any of us and they're not going to get billed to death. It's just part of the program. And we encourage that. That's why we include just a
Yeah.
flat number so that they'll call, email, send a text message, and ask us questions.
Yeah. Well, I like that model. I switched all of our stuff over to a new CPA a few years ago, and it's similar, right? And I get a heck of a lot more value from that. And I don't. I think he would agree with me. I don't think I'm exploiting that, but I
Mm.
call him a lot more than I called my last CPA, because and I probably actually paid less for my CPA that kind of billed by the hour, but I never called him unless it was like something major, because I'm like, all right, clock's going to start as soon as, do I really need to call him for this? But now I just know I'm paying a quarterly fee every quarter to my CPA. Like, hey, let's make sure we've got that quarterly strategy session on the books. Hey, yeah, I think this is worth a phone call to run this by him or whatever. And so that's a really good model that makes a lot of sense. Um, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this just because I want to make sure we have time to touch on some other things. But how did you get into all this? I think you said earlier you've been doing this for 21 years. So apparently you started, in franchising when you were like 9 or 10. Um, but how did you get into this side of franchising?
Yeah, great question. And I ended up in franchising like most. It wasn't something I planned to do. It
Yeah.
just kind of
Yeah.
happened. And really it was I had graduated college early with a business management degree. And I really wanted to be a business management consultant. I knew that was a direction I wanted to go. And
Okay.
the first opportunity I had happened to be at a consulting company that helped companies franchise. And I always loved entrepreneurship. My dad was an entrepreneur. I saw him launch his business when I was a teenager, and he just ran a little small little business. And I just was fascinated with the idea that you could start a business and do that, and that we lived in the United States where it's so we take for granted. I think most take for granted how easy it is to start a business, launch a business, and be able to get an enterprise going literally overnight.
Hmm. Yeah.
You could be in business. It's just such a wonderful thing. And so I've also looked at so I worked there for many years, learned, went to work for a client, and then ended up back into consulting,
Okay.
and doing this. And
So you went to work for a franchisor for a while.
He was a franchisor. Yep, yep, and helped them
Okay.
grow from a regional brand to a national brand. Um, and then ended up back into consulting. I actually owned a franchise for a little while. Also, I bought a franchise, and I guess I
Oh, really?
would be considered a semi absentee
Yeah.
franchisee for about, I think it was about 6 years I owned that, or 5 or 6 years before I ended up selling it.
Okay.
And this is a great story. I may have shared this before, but the franchise that I owned and ended up selling, it was in the it was a water restoration franchise.
Yeah. Okay.
and
Yeah.
and
Good
for
businesses
Yeah,
generally.
and to your point, for others who might listen in that are thinking about buying a franchise, for me as a consultant and the work that we do, generally our the industry kind of rises and falls on the health of the economy. If it's a strong economy,
Mhm.
business is good. If the economy's not great, well, then business tends to not be great.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, what's something, I was looking for something that could diversify, that
Yeah.
regardless of economic conditions would be something where people would have to have and that for me was why I ended up buying the
Yeah.
water restoration business. And but I'm an owner operator in my current business, so I couldn't be an owner operator in that one.
Yeah.
And so I ended up hiring a manager, and he ran it for about 4 years before I sold it to him. And we were a middle of the pack franchisee in the
Yeah.
system during that time. It's maybe, revenue wise, we were around 500,000 in revenue. And because I had a manager and other extra staff, it was just okay for me
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
business. So I sold it to him, and he took that business, and he in less than 2 years grew it to almost $4 million. And
Whoa.
yeah, yeah,
You're
and
like, dude, you were holding out on me, man. Like
yeah, yeah.
we
So
could have been doing at least 2 million while you were working for me.
yeah, well, and,
Um,
and if I was, I wouldn't have sold it. And
yeah,
so
right, exactly. He's like, man, if I do like good enough, he'll keep me on, and then maybe I'll just get to buy it out from under him, and then I'll go ham with it. But yeah, I mean, we did the same with our second franchise, which was the insulation one that I referenced earlier. Like we did fine with it, but we didn't make like life-changing money from it. We had a full-time general manager, and yeah, I think with those types of businesses, those kind of service-based businesses that are very heavy on operations, and you gotta run a tight ship operationally in order for the margins to really be what you need them to be. It's not, they don't lend themselves as well to other types of franchises for that, manager run business right out of the gate. It can be done. You did it, we did it. It wasn't a failure, but we weren't the top franchisees in that business either. Whereas our other franchise that my wife was the owner operator in the beginning, we've been top producers in that system. She was franchisee of the year a couple of years ago. I think you just, and like once you sold it to your manager, he was off to the races, right? He
Yeah.
blew the thing up. So
Yeah.
there's something to be said. There's other franchises out there that really do work really, really well for that manager run model, and you'll see that that's kind of the norm throughout the franchise. Like, you'd be hard pressed to find a franchisee that didn't have a full time manager in place from the onset. But that's really cool, man. So you've got your consulting experience, but you've sat on the franchisor and the franchisee side. So I mean, that perspective that you're bringing to, your clients now, especially the ones that haven't yet become a franchisor, that's invaluable because you can really speak from all sides of it.
Yeah, and for me, the most valuable experience really has been on the side of being a franchisee and going
Yeah,
through training and paying the royalty payments and
yeah, yeah,
changing systems when systems were required to be changed and going through the new marketing programs that are required and um, and I would even say, just as a kind of closing thought on kind of lesson learned out of that, there
hmm,
were many, but a couple of quick things on a franchise standpoint. One is I realized that what a difference it makes between being a manager versus an owner, right?
yeah,
With him just taking off with that,
yep,
so the lesson for me was really looking at it and saying, well, I probably ought to have partnered him into the
yeah,
business, either from the onset or given a pathway for that, so that he knew if certain performance measurements were hit, that he'd be
yeah,
a partner in the deal.
yep.
So I think those were some important pieces
Yeah,
there.
that's
Yeah.
that's a huge takeaway, and I would, like, if I'm working with someone, and it's largely because we've learned some of the same lessons ourselves, right? But if I'm working with someone that's, entertaining that type of a business and hiring a manager from day one, I'm like, I don't, there's a million ways you could structure it, but you want them to think like an owner, right? So whether that's they actually own a piece of the company, I think the best case scenario is if you have someone pegged already, to be your operator before you commit to the franchise. Have them put a little bit of their own money in, even if it's like a couple $1,000s, if that's all that they can afford. But at least they've got some actual skin in the game. Give them some real equity in the business. We did kind of like a profit share type thing with our manager, but it still wasn't the same, right? Like, and he did a fine job. He especially to get the business to a certain point, he just and he and I've had these conversations. So, I would say this if he were sitting right here, he just wasn't the guy to take it to the next level. And so, I think there were ways we could have structured it even a little bit better to really, incentivize him to think like an owner. Because again, in those types of business, so much of it is, water restoration. It's a demand, right? If someone, it's a needed service. If your basement floods, like, you're not, is the timing right? What are the interest rate? You're calling, right? You need to get it taken care of. So a lot of the challenges in that business are just, like I said, operationally running a tight ship. And so, it's one thing to have a manager that can go out and grow the revenue of the business. You need that manager to be able to protect the margins in the business too. So I mean, honestly, a lot of those types of franchises that I work with, they've clearly learned some of these lessons as well, where they actually have it as a requirement where, hey, if you're going to come in and buy this franchise, but you have like a full time corporate job that you plan to keep, or you own another business and you're going to put a full time manager in, they need to own at least 10%. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
I
I
think.
think they've all learned those same lessons.
Yeah. And I think that's a great starting point. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
And maybe even a performance schedule that would allow them to earn up to maybe 25% or
Yep.
40% or whatever, based on certain
Totally. So they've got
performance
some upside
requirements.
and they're not capped, from day one.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Everyone, we'll get right back to the episode, but I wanted to quickly share a free resource with you. If you're curious about franchise ownership and want to learn more about how countless people, including myself, have leveraged franchising as a way to create more freedom for themselves and to take control of their livelihood, I've put together an ebook. It's called Franchise Wealth Creation, and it's the perfect starting point for anyone that's just curious to learn more about this whole franchise thing and how I've helped hundreds of other people navigate all the steps involved in understanding and researching franchising. So click the link in the show notes, fill out a short form. I'll send you the ebook. I think it's a great starting point if you're curious at all about learning more about franchising. All right, let's get back to the episode. So look, one of the things I'd love to get your take on, because of all the different franchises you've seen and work with, what's your take on um, pros and cons between an emerging franchise versus a more established franchise? Like, if you're someone that's considering getting into a franchise, becoming a franchisee, um, what are just kind of your general thoughts, pros and cons? I know there's so many different variables, right? But general thoughts, and then maybe we can unpack it a little bit more from there.
Sure, sure. So, because I'm in the emerging new franchisor space, I have a really high comfort level in this area because I'm used to it. I'm familiar with it, but not everyone else is. And so,
Yeah,
I think that if you're joining a franchise system and you're going to be in the first, call it first 10 franchisees, there is a certain risk tolerance that you need to have that other franchisees joining the system they might have, but it's not going to be a requirement. So if you're
yeah,
joining a
yeah,
system with less than 10, you've got to be willing to have a higher risk because the franchisor is new. They're learning a lot from
yeah,
you. Number two is if you're buying into a new franchise system, my clients probably will not like that I share this, but it's the truth of it is you have more generally more wiggle room in negotiating certain terms in the agreement. And
definitely.
it's in the franchisor's best interest to try and accommodate what some of those happen to be. Now, you might not get everything you want or go through that, but
Yeah,
there should be, in my opinion, and this we advise clients to be willing to have a give and take, knowing that there is the franchisees that are coming on earlier in the process, they are taking on a little more, they are taking on more risk than someone that's franchise number 30 in a system or beyond.
yeah,
So I think that's an important piece. Now, part of the fun thing of when you join up with a new system, your first 10 or 20 franchisee, is most of the time you get to work directly with the founder. You get to
yes,
work with, you get to know them personally. You get to know, you're probably know their spouse and their kids. And when you come into town, they go out to dinner with you and you get a lot of that TLC that franchise number 40 is not going to get.
yeah.
They're just not going to.
And you probably get to keep that too, right? Like, even, say fast forward 10 years and now there's 300 franchisees. Like, if that founder's still in the picture and you were franchisee number 5, and you and the founder were pretty tight, in those early days, like, you probably still have a direct line to that founder. Whereas, probably anyone past franchisee number 50 doesn't even have a cell phone number,
Y-
there's a
Yeah.
lot of benefits potentially that can come from that. Like, that's a point I try to stress to people in terms of a benefit of emerging
Yep.
franchises and getting in
Yeah.
early.
Yeah, and you also have the advantage of, in most cases, just about any territory you want is
Yep.
available. So they've
Yep.
got lots of space or greenfield open and available for you that you don't have to with most emerging brands or new franchises. You don't have to sacrifice like you might with a brand that maybe has two or three, 400 franchises where you ideally would want location is this prime location or territory that you really want, but it's not available, but you kind of get close to what you want, right?
Yeah.
um yeah.
Well, and there's a lot of brands out there that, are very established brands, great brand recognition, and you're not going to find territory, period. unless there happens to be a franchisee looking to sell their business, in which case, you may be paying a premium if they've built a profitable business. Any number of reasons they could be selling, but yeah, the territory is a big piece. And here's where I'd love for you to really kind of shine the light on where you're really able to help your clients, because I have this conversation all the time with people that I'm coaching through this process. Don't automatically assume that because a brand is emerging or earlier stage, that all emerging brands are kind of created equally, right? Like there are things that an emerging franchisor can do to mitigate some of that risk that's normally going to be there for the person investing early stage in a franchise. One of those things is, coming in and partnering with someone like Big Sky, right? A founder that's smart enough to recognize, like, hey, I've built this great business. I know this business inside and out, but I don't have a clue about this whole franchise thing and how it works. Like, let me go find someone that's an expert in this, and let me link arms with them so that they can show me how to do it the right way, help me avoid the pitfalls. And so I think that's important for people to understand too.
Yeah, I agree, and obviously I'm biased because I that's what we do. But the reality is that the service we provide to our clients and helping them franchise is the same thing that a franchisor does for a franchisee. It's
Yeah.
providing
Yeah.
a proven system and pathway to help accelerate the entry point into franchising. Not only accelerate, but make it more efficient, more effective, and avoid a lot of those common mistakes or pitfalls that come along the way. And if you're considering working with an emerging brand, it might be worth asking, did you hire consultants, and did you
Yeah.
hire quality franchise attorneys to help, and other franchise professionals to help you through this process? And just one thing for your listeners too, Wes, I love that you use the word pitfall. We actually have a free white paper called 9 Pitfalls to Avoid When Franchising Your Business. It's just 9pitfalls.com for a free
Love
download.
it. Love it.
Um,
We'll link that in the
yeah,
show notes.
but it's that idea that there are certain things that that entrepreneurs will do where you have to take a certain level of risk as an entrepreneur to start the business and
Mhm.
get comfortable understanding the nature of some of those risks. The challenge with that in franchising is if you skip a step here or there, it doesn't just it's not a linear mistake. It's not, oh, if I skip something here, it's going to cost me a few days or $10,000. No, this is a an exponential mistake that
Yes. Compound.
if it was it's going to compound. Instead of being $10,000, like this could be hundreds of thousands of dollars down the road, or millions of dollars depending
Yeah,
on what happens, because franchising is multiplying. That's
that's
the
right.
whole idea behind it, like you said, that exponential piece of it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That's such a good point. And there absolutely are, you know, franchises out there, companies that are trying to franchise by just bootstrapping it, right? Where they're not going out and calling the Big Sky franchise teams of the world. They're just kind of winging it, trying to figure it out on their own. And sometimes they figure it out, right? But those early franchisees were probably along for a pretty bumpy ride, up until a certain point. Um, Others kind of realize, like, hey, I need to pull in a professional that knows how to do this, and let them help us sort it out. But the point I wanted the listeners to get is that just because a brand is emerging doesn't mean it's inherently as risky as they might initially assume. Like, I work with a lot of emerging brands, and some of the emerging brands that I'm getting connected with these days, I mean, they're coming out of the gates with better systems, better processes, better tech, better training, franchisors staffed up, they've got capital. I mean, they're ahead of other brands I work with that have been doing this for a decade at this point, and I think you could probably speak to this. The landscape of franchising has changed, quite a bit over the last decade or so. You've got more private equity money, backing younger and younger brands. You've got, more consolidation happening where, as I call them, parent companies are, going out and acquiring a small brand or a small business with the intention of franchising it. So, anyways, there's quite a bit of sophistication with some of these really young emerging brands that I'm seeing. It's still not going to be the right fit for everyone. To be the first, 10 or 20 franchisees in any brand, regardless of how buttoned up they are, like, it's going to require a certain mindset and probably someone that is a little more entrepreneurial minded than some. But there's a pretty wide range of emerging franchises out there once you really start to look under the hoods.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and to your point from the earlier on question for the first part of this interview, uh, there's a franchise out there for everyone. There's a different
Yep.
kind of franchise out there. Uh, uh, there are so many different options. All these unique versions, and then there are the classic franchise models as well.
Yeah.
A food a quick serve restaurant or a burrito shop or something. Lots of great options there too.
My neighbor owns a burrito. It's called Burrito Shack. They actually started in our area, and I think they're still pretty regional. Um, he's doing just fine with his burrito shop. He's doing just fine, and he's just got one of them. And he had the rights to do two or three more, and he sold them back. He said, "I don't. We're doing just fine with this one, and I don't want to overcomplicate it. Like my lifestyle's good. Like let's just ride with this." So yeah, it's a good point. There's nothing wrong with the this conversation probably. We talked a lot about some of the just out of the box type of franchises, but there's nothing wrong with some of what the traditional franchises are when people tend to think about franchising too. That they've been around as long as they have for a reason, right?
That's exactly right.
So, Tom, man, really, really enjoyed it, man. We could talk for hours about this stuff, but I know you have better things to do than yap with me here on a Friday afternoon. But um, where should people go if they want to connect with you? Tell them about your podcast too. You've got a great podcast, and we're kind enough to invite me to join your podcast a while back. So make sure you tell people where they can go listen to your podcast.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, this is really, I guess, a podcast swap. It would mean I don't know if it was intended that way, but it happened that way.
Yeah,
But it's called Multiply Your Success. Multiply Your Success. We're fast approaching episode 250 here, about 4.5 years in,
let's
or coming
go.
up on 5 years, I should say, for the podcast. And the best way to reach out, anyone who listens in and says, "Boy, I've got a business, or I've been thinking maybe about franchising. What should I do?" We offer free, no obligation consultation. There are no fees until you say, "Let's do business." So happy to have a conversation with you. You can visit our website, bigskyfranchiseteam.com. That's bigskyfranchiseteam.com. Or download that free white paper, 9pitfalls.com, if
Yeah.
that's a little bit easier to remember and type in.
I'm going to download that. I want to check it out. But um, awesome, man. We'll link all that in the show notes, make it really easy for people to find you. But Tom, man, thank you for what you're doing, man. I'm glad that there are people and firms out there like you that are helping great companies franchise their business the right way. I'm such a believer in franchising when it's done right. I always use that caveat when I'm talking about franchising, when it's done right, because it's not always done right. And, I'm glad that there are companies like yours that are really, helping these young emerging franchise companies do it the right way, give them a blueprint. And I'm excited to see, what you guys are able to keep doing and some of the awesome companies that you bring on to the franchising stage here in the future.
Well, Wes, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate it.
Of course. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.